Thank you, Mark. So before we go ahead and get to our speakers from Life Soils, is there anything that anybody wants to revise or any questions about the agenda?
Yeah, I want to add an item onto the end. I'd like to discuss the Santa Fe River MFL that is still, they're still working on a plan for. And give me about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes at the end. We can do that.
Sure. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and get started with our speaker today, or speakers rather. So we have 3 speakers from Life Soils, and they, I think, talked to us once previously, and now that things are kind of moving forward with the, it's not called the Resource Recovery Park, right? It has a different name, or the extension.
Right. We initially were looking at kind of housing our research operation there with the guys from UF, basically to research compost further. That's kind of on leaps and bounds. We've done a lot of research in the field, etc. So at this point, actually, are looking at a public-private partnership with the city of New. So I think as recently as today, I think they closed on a piece of property, or they're about to close on a piece of property, which is out in the city of Newberry by their wastewater treatment plant, which was an ideal location to put a compost operation in. Life Soils intent, as you said, we met before, so we specialize in recovery of organic materials and then converting those into compost products, soil amendments, and materials for amending soils to basically conserve water and reduce chemical use and nutrient runoff, etc. So the city were interested, obviously, in some kind of favorable relationship where we can take waste streams from them, convert them to compost, and also allow us to bring in materials from other locations, so that can be of a size where it's viable enough to be a business entity. So obviously we're looking at taking in waste streams from Alachua County and surrounding area to create our command product, which has been utilized now for about 5 years. We've seen significant increase in demand for the product, and we constantly battle movement and shipping of the material for large projects.
Aaron, can you speak a little closer into your mic, please?
Yeah, sure. Let me turn my volume up, actually.
Thank you.
Oops. Yeah, a bit closer. See this ugly face. There you go. So yeah, so that was kind of the I've actually got a PowerPoint that I can share with you if I can manage to share my screen. 1 second.
So does this fit under the Alachua County general title?
Desktop 1. 1 second. Did that work? Nope. Yeah. Sorry. Never mind. I can't get that to open.
I can try to share my screen and go through that presentation. Give me just a moment.
What was the question about general title for Alachua County?
There we go.
Let me get going on here.
There it is.
There we go.
I'm just asking if this facility would be in Alachua County.
Yes, yes. It will be Alachua County, but city of Newberry, in the
But
city.
it will get Alachua County funding.
I don't know yet. I know that we have a letter of intent with the city of Newberry. We're hoping obviously Alachua County's partners on this. We've been working with Alachua County now for almost 4 years, as I live actually in Newberry. But yeah, it didn't seem like things were going to move forward with Alachua County. So city of Newberry actually reached out to us, and we formed a very quick relationship with city of Newberry. They were open arms and said they had a piece of property that would work for us. And it's been over the last 8 months, been moving forward at a very quick pace. I don't see any reason why we don't start construction on it at the end of 2022.
Good.
Mhm. So I'll have to rely on you, Mark, then to advance these slides. But
Absolutely.
so if you want to go ahead, please, buddy. Probably most of you know about Life Soils, but this is just a quick summary of who we are. Obviously respected leaders in organics recycling and compost production and utilization. So we do supply already, as I said, we've got rapidly expanding markets for products that we initially began to produce for agriculture and turf grass applications for golf courses, sports turf, citrus groves. So that grew really quickly. We did find from doing research with University of Florida, the product also had some really beneficial microbiological traits as far as natural disease suppression for nematode control and various diseases in turf and crops. So so our intent obviously is, as I've actually been in the compost industry, producing and utilizing compost for 30 years now. You can tell by the funny accent that I'm from Alabama originally. Just kidding, UK. But so I actually traveled around Europe, Far East, and I landed in the US in 2000. So we set up a company called Harvest Quest, which is kind of a partner to Life Soils. And there we go. So we have a technology that's an inoculant, basically, which I discovered when I was actually a very young man. I was about 18 years old. Discovered this product by accident, playing around with soil blends. And I created something that got hot very quickly and decomposed in a matter of 72 hours from looking like soil to being a pile of white powder. And at the time, it was no use to me because that's not what I was trying to do. So anyway, but as aside from that, this reaction was obviously discovered to be an inoculant that accelerates decomposition. So when I came to the US with it initially back in 2000, I was based in Colorado, and there were some large compost operations there where we introduced this inoculant and a methodology for composting known as the MSAP composting method was derived. So from that, the technology grew. It's utilized now right across the United States. Lots of award-winning operations around the country. Actually we have an operation in Perth, Western Australia, some operations up in Canada, all the way across to Utah, California. So we do have our finger on the pulse as far as how compost is being created and utilized right across the country. So you can move on, Mark, please. So a quick synopsis of the methodology. If you think about a compost pile, typically you create a pile, it generates heat basically through biological activity, uses up oxygen in the pile, and the pile has to be turned frequently to keep it aerobic. So the heat in the pile is basically in the middle. With this methodology and the use of the inoculant, the heat is generated on the outside of the pile and works its way inwards. So it's kind of a reverse dynamics, reverse physics of composting. Benefit being that we can decompose organic materials in aerobic conditions without disturbing the pile. So it's low cost technology. We don't generate odors. We don't attract vectors and that kind of thing that you normally associate with composting, just because of the nature of the process. So things come in, they're immediately mixed, they're placed into a pile. There's a capping layer placed over the top, which is previously composted material, and the inoculant is applied. It multiplies because it's so reactive to oxygen on the outside of the pile first, and then those populations work their way towards the center of the pile. That photograph at the top there is the actual visible biological populations in the windrow during composting. And basically that is just masses of microbial activity. So we have accelerated decomposition with very limited turning. We do turn it about 30 days in, but at that point, things are sufficiently biodegraded where there's a nice earthy smell. So we can mitigate odors, and we again, the nature of the inoculant and the unique biology translates over to the finished product. So if you can move on, Mark, that would be cool. So unique finished products, we have a very unique DNA RNA fingerprint to these compost materials. They have very high counts of beneficial microbes. As I said, they can naturally suppress disease. 95% suppression of plant parasitic nematodes has been shown by UF studies. So we're providing stabilized organic matter for soils, which improves the soil's ability to hold nutrients and water, which is something that obviously we're going to face as the population of Florida ever increases. You know, the demand for water, we've been lucky in the last few years that we've had a lot of rain, but I remember several years back it was pretty dry, and the lakes around Claremont where I live were way down. So I expect we'll return there at some point. So obviously we can save water, we can reduce fertilizer inputs, we improve the soil's ability to hold nutrients and water, so we can dial back fertilizer use, which again obviously reduces runoff and protects watersheds. And there's some statistics there at the bottom of the page that basically give you some numbers. So if we take a sandy soil and increase the organic matter by 1%, we can, every cubic foot of soil can hold an additional 1.5 quarts of water every time we irrigate, which is held in the root zone, which equates to 16,500 gallons of water per acre foot. So in most cases, if you amend soils, there are, you know, large portions of the year where you don't have to irrigate at all because you can hold sufficient water in those root zones between rain events. Next, Mark, please. So I put this slide in because we kind of give you guys an update from where we were at before. We just recently constructed a new compost facility down in Charlotte County, which was basically to facilitate supply of materials to our customers in the southern part of the state, which were not amused at paying freight charges from all the way up north. So that happened. That's now operational. As we've said, we're looking at a public-private partnership being developed in Alachua County, which is quite far on. And as Ryan said, we're hoping to have that facility under construction by the end of this year. We have an operation it's actually owned by Hillsborough County, which is in Lithia, which is Southeast County landfill. It's adjacent to the landfill. So there is a large compost operation there that we work with Hillsborough County. We supply the inoculant. We have a takeoff agreement to take all the finished product from that operation, as we do from several others that we supply the inoculant to across the state. We have multiple UF research projects underway, looking at row crops now, plant health, disease suppression, and some exciting other landscape applications where we're looking at the use of soil amendments and native plantings. Very close, and we're all very passionate about that. We're seeing such, an increase in development that we're losing wildlife habitat. So we're very excited about being able to drive not only soil ordinances, but also, looking at the use of native plants in landscapes, and even having ordinances for that where they must use native species. There's enough of them out there that do perform extremely well and look, pleasing. So that's another project that we're doing, which we're excited about.
We're very excited about that project. It's actually taking place in the Lake Nona area of Orlando. It's involving UF, UCF, Tavistock Development, and Cherry Lake Farms. And they're looking at both soil and plant biodiversity and ways to implement native plantings in a large development that's being developed in that area. And as a Florida native, that's a very exciting project to see undertaken. Not only are we looking at ways to utilize waste streams to enrich soils, but we're looking at ways to incorporate native plants in areas of new development. As Florida expands, the population grows. We're at a point where, it's not whether you build it, they will come. It's they're coming, you might as well build it. So if there's an opportunity to make the development less impactful, we need to look at all options. And this is a very important project.
Yeah, I think the case in point there is this is looking at a closed loop system. So that's a huge development. It's a 28-year build out, I believe. So it's going to be a whole new city town type conurbation by the time it's done. So the fact there'll be a compost operation either on the property or close by, where yard waste, food scraps, all that kind of deal can be diverted and turned into soil amendments that will be used back on property. That's their wish. We're also pushing and working with a lot of the other property developers. There are ordinances or rulings, particularly in the Toho Water Authority. I guess the city of St. Cloud now is kind of following suit, where they're putting restrictions on reclaimed water. So a property can only draw the same amount of reclaimed water as it generates. So that's a good thing. So that's making these developers sit up and take note of the fact that if you amend your soil, you can reduce irrigation requirements by 40-50%. So plus you have a healthier landscape anyway. So next one. Agriculture. We started in citrus about 5 years ago now. Actually was driven by the greening at the time. Obviously the growers had only just recovered from dealing with canker for years, which they still are, but then greening came along, which is even worse. Studies showed that the only way really to sustain the trees was to feed the soil, make the soil productive enough to promote root growth. We've effectively been using the product to do that. So we're actually working against the decline in the trees by feeding the soil, and the trees are able to grow feeder roots and sustain themselves, because the greening disease destroys the root of the tree. So we're able to kind of replace them almost as quickly as the disease wipes them out. So we're able to sustain yields, and we've seen some increases in recent years. The benefit there again is reduced irrigation requirements, at least 40% with some of the larger growers that we're dealing with. Huge reductions in fertilizer inputs, just because we're increasing. A lot of these citrus groves that sit on the central ridge are, it's like beach sand. When you go up there and dig in the soil, there isn't any soil, it's just sand. So adding this organic matter to that soil increases that soil's ability to hold nutrients and hold water. So a lot of those fertilizers that were applied at significantly higher rates, knowing that a lot of it would leach, has been drastically reduced because they're not seeing that leaching anymore. So
Darren, I think you should probably touch on drastically reduce. They've been reduced altogether.
Yeah, in certain circumstances. Yep. Phosphorus inputs, particularly, they've been eliminated. Dry phosphate applications have been eliminated in a lot of these groves. They don't need it. So and basically that's because the soil in Florida is inherently high in phosphorus anyway, but it's not usually plant available. So there's a biological interaction between the compost and the soil, where the microbes can actually release and supply that phosphorus to the trees. in a very, very slow release form. There's no leaching potential there, but the trees are able to draw from the soil. And there were some studies done actually in Australia, of all places, recently, that in dry wheat production, that they showed they had a similar soil there, high in phosphorus, and they figured by increasing these microbial populations that they wouldn't need to use phosphorus for 80 to 100 years. There was that much in the soil. So next slide, please, Mark.
Hey, Darren, I'd like to just step back this one real quick. So just to recap the ag side, you know, we supply product again over to 60,000 acres. We've got most of these acres that's now been on the program for 4 years have reduced water up to 40%. So we're seeing, I'm not going to say it's over 60,000 acres, but certainly well over 30,000 acres have seen water reduced by 40%. On top of that, this year we're seeing growers not apply fertilizer at all, and add another 2 tons of command. So I feel like we're certainly made a lot of headway here, and I think environmentally you could say, hey, this is something that's actually working, and we're very proud of that. So,
And there's nothing saying that this can't be accomplished as far as landscaping goes, with soil amending and replacing typical fertilizer applications with top dressing of compost. I think the future is very bright as far as environmental approach to landscaping if we continue on this path.
So we mentioned the professional sports turf. So that was kind of our original, along with agriculture, that was our original market, our specialized products. We screen a lot of the command to an extremely fine particle size to make it suitable for closely mown turf. Minimum of 450 golf courses in Florida use this product. We export all over the Caribbean. We have truckloads of material. It's not unusual to have truckloads of material going to Louisiana, Alabama, the Carolinas. I think we've shipped material as far as Missouri. We have a large project in North Carolina that we probably will be doing very soon, which I think all told is a major sports complex, Carolina Panthers, I believe. We've done the Orioles field, the Marlins, the Pirates, the Gators. I mean, we do all the professional sports fields with this product. They see such good results from it. So that was really one of our specialized markets, which basically leads to the next slide, if you want to skip on, Mark. Was the urban landscape. So I think when you recap what our game is, it's basically to close that green loop. So and most of the feedstocks that we compost are generated in the urban areas. So yard waste, curbside, leaf and yard waste collection, food scraps, all that kind of stuff. So what better place to return this material, particularly when we have an environment like we do with sandy soils, where we're using way too much water, way too much fertilizer, way too much pesticide. So again, it's this green loop that we want to achieve, even going as far as the native plantings now with native plants. So we did over 10 million square feet that we top dressed last year, and soil amending now is becoming more commonplace. As I said, a lot of the property developers are seeing the benefits. A lot of these areas where they build these new homes are really poor quality soil. A lot of it's subsoil that they dig out of retention areas to make these bases and pads to build these homes on. You've seen it, they throw them up in a matter of days or weeks. Heavy equipment running around on there. There's all kinds of rebar and stuff buried in the ground. So not the ideal environment for stimulating plant growth. By amending that soil, we can jumpstart that ecosystem. We in a study that we did with UF on top of the world over a 3-year period, where we amended lots around model homes, we were able to kind of, UF was able to gather the data from that and look at the soil water moisture curve, the biology of the soil, its ability to function as it should. And basically they went and looked at homes that had been built at that location over the last 20 years. So they were able to go pull soil samples from landscapes that were established 3 years ago, 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. And basically they found that it was about a decade and a half before, almost 2 decades in some cases, before that soil was actually able to function. It took that long to develop its own organic layer and be able to function as it would in a natural environment. So obviously amending when the home's built, takes away that period of excess watering, fertilizer use, all the other things that cause the problems with runoff and watershed problems, etc. So again, we're trying to just drive. The reason for the facility in Newberry is to be able to be close, to be able to have regional operations where we can pull in these organic waste streams, convert them into beneficial products, and go and build soil health, and create what we see. And in some instances, people will tell you, well, native plants grow in sandy soils anyway. Well, yes, they do, but they don't grow in subsoil that came from 30 foot down, that's got a pH of 8 and no organic matter, no nutrient or water holding capacity. So if you go and look at a native woodland or a native pasture area or whatever, you'll find that there is a black layer that took decades to form. And the plants are thriving in that top layer. So again, we're just trying to recreate that natural soil ecosystem, put the organic matter in there, the soil carbon, the biology, and we're sequestering carbon in the soil. So we're actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions, not only by diverting organics from landfill that would have gone in there and created methane. We're composting that down and sequestering carbon in the soil that stays there for decades. So that's basically our story. And you guys have anything else to add? Nice picture there. That was a property in Claremont, just down the road from me. You can obviously see the definitive line where the soil was amended with our product, on the other side where it wasn't. So a dramatic difference there in health and ability to deal with dry conditions. So that was back in May 2019. And that's me talking. So giving people a tour of a compost operation in Bushnell, just south of Ocala. Pickup truck is the stage. So
Thank you so much for that
no problem.
presentation, and thank you for coming. Did either of the other two have anything they wanted to add before we went into questions?
I think that it's very important that we look at opportunities statewide to reuse waste streams. Like I mentioned earlier, the population is growing rapidly. I think we need to figure out a way to mitigate some of the habitat loss, as well as the additional waste that are generated with the growing population. I feel strongly that Life Soils is moving in the right direction, and I joined the team because I believed in what they're accomplishing. I believe in their mission. They're doing it for the right reasons. Very, very confident in the team that we have.
Awesome. Thank you.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. So I imagine that many of our members will have questions. Do y'all have some time to take questions?
Sure.
Okay, great. So who wants to go first?
I'll start, Nisha. I'm kind of curious. I think this is a really great thing, and I was familiar with the Command product 5 or 6 years ago when I was working. I'm retired from UF now, but working with the urban nutrient management issues. You mentioned several times studies. And I guess from my point of view, my question would be, have any of these studies, particularly any of them that have been 2 and 3 years through, have they been published in peer-reviewed journals?
I think they're in the process of being. Eben's study was Eben Bean's study that was done on Top of the World, where we did the soil amending. That was quite an in-depth. They buried lysimeters in the soil to look for nutrient leaching, etc. Results from that were they've been shared widely. I think there's any idea, Ryan, what was the latest on that? I think it was about to get published and
Yeah, I know Pierce is on. I think Pierce is on the call. I don't know if he's capable or able to chime in on this, but
I don't know what the status is. I know that they've been submitted. I know that there are EDIS documents, internal UF documents, peer-reviewed documents where that information has been shared. I also know that the FDACs, basically Eben Bean had a contract to produce a soil amendments statewide guidance document, largely.
Chase Bailey.
Sorry. So I don't know the answer to the question, George, explicitly,
Yeah.
but I can find out for you if you like.
Yeah, I guess Pierce, coming from the university and having spent a career working with various and sundry products, while I think this one has great potential, I really do encourage you guys to get some of this stuff in the scientific peer-reviewed journals, because as we go forward, entities, public entities, FDACs, FDEP, down the line, as they incorporate some of this technology into best management practices, it really needs to have, it'll be pushed along much faster and more effectively if you've got this in the peer-reviewed scientific journals, not just extension fact sheets and things like that. Well, that's good and they're helpful, but it's the coin of the realm is the peer-reviewed journal. And you guys apparently, from your discussion, have done a ton of research with various entities. And I would really encourage you to push those entities to publish their research in peer-reviewed journals. I have some other questions for you, but I'm going to let some of the other colleagues jump in there. Just wanted to bring that up and just kind of highlight that for you guys. I think you're doing some great stuff, and I really encourage you to make sure that your cooperators get their science published.
we appreciate that. Thank you.
Dave.
You're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to everyone. I was here last time when you came, and I was so excited about the product afterwards that I ended up spending quite a bit of time talking with Pierce, first of all, on the phone, and he explained a bit of the research that he was involved with, which got me more excited. And I really, really want to see this product go as far as it can possibly go, I think, which is quite far. For one, most people may not know that when a piece of property is prepared for new construction, they quite often just peel off all the existing topsoil, whatever's there. So it's like it's not even capable of supporting growth at that time. And so that will often require multiple applications of a fertilizer just to get it to live. And and of course, a product like this, if used and substituted, for at the very early stage, put in to use, then they'll need very little fertilizer and be able to, have a good, healthy product or healthy lawn afterwards. So, that's just one application. And the other application, of course, is about the same time that they gave this presentation, or very soon thereafter, the County Board of County Commissioners passed the fertilizer ordinance, which limited fertilizing quite a bit. And I remember thinking at that time how perfect it would be if this product was to be promoted to lawn care industry to use in place of fertilizing. One of the reasons we went from 3 to 4 months as our recommendation to the board which was accepted, by the way, for the open period for fertilizing in Alachua County was because there were, there was presentation. Well, quite frankly, it was solely based upon the information, the scientific information that Scott and George were able to bring to the committee that said, they need to be able to have the ability to put in a second round of fertilizer. And so I don't know if it's true, it hasn't been tested, but I would believe that, if they use this at the very beginning instead of, a second round of fertilizer, they would have a much healthier lawn. So that would be something which I'd like to see looked into as well. But at any rate, for what you guys are doing, I'm very, very grateful and thank you very much. And keep on doing what you're doing, and please keep us informed as well. I always saw this kind of as a very a holistic thing of, we've got plenty of restaurants in Gainesville and Alachua County in a whole, that they have a lot of food at the end of the day that they just throw out.
Mhm.
And that goes into our into our dump. I mean, that's put in the ground. And it would be so much nicer if we were able to put that to good use. And and in turn, then on the other end, of course, you guys are making compost from that. So this is a product that I don't see a downside to. The fact, the way you actually do the composting minimizes the amount of methane that goes into the air. It's the very process itself, and which is something that people maybe not thought of. But if anyone does any research into composting generally, they'll find that out. But this is a whole different process than what most people are aware of. And I'd like to see something of this process kind of shared to the public in general. It'd be nice if, if the general public, instead of doing typical composting in their backyard, were able to use, some of your products to help them decompose, their, the waste a little faster, and to do it without as much methane as comes off of these backyard piles. So, address any of those comments as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I mean it's interesting. We have looked at kind of home kits for composting, and I think there are obviously apparatus that you can buy, a home composting tumbler or some have a different levels, but we often run across the fact people like to collect the kitchen scraps from their kitchen and then they throw it in there, and it just becomes a putrescible wet mess that stinks and draws roaches and flies, and because they don't understand that it's a balance of carbon and nitrogen. So we had basically looked at that for supplying a home composting unit, the inoculant and the carbon-based materials that were sized correctly so that you could actually compost. You want 3 parts carbon to 1 part kitchen scraps, basically. So you could actually have a system where you had a bag that you bought from your local garden center that was a pre-shredded or pre-size reduced carbon-based material that was suitable for composting in a home composter. So that, I think, takes that to the next level, because I don't think anyone's offered that before. And in regards to the lawn care companies, we have seen several new infant industry that's just sprung up, that all these guys do is run around top dressing lawns now with command. So it's grown a whole organic industry of top dressing. A lot of the ordinances in Sarasota County and some of these other counties do have an exemption. So compost is actually exempt from the ordinances. So yeah, in a lot of cases, people are using this product and other composts as well to sustain turf through these periods, because in some of these counties they have 8-9 month blackout periods, which I think we sometimes disagree on, because I think it oftentimes, if you have such a narrow window and you've got all these lawn care companies, they're all going to put out fertilizer at the same point in time because they know the deadline's approaching. So they're all going to go and put out fertilizer. And if you get a rain event at that period in time, then you can compound the issue, I think, in some cases. But
even with a typical blackout period, you do see service providers applying higher than normal rates in an attempt, even if it's a slow release product, in an attempt to make it through the blackout period. So most of the time, in many cases, I would expect service providers, fertilizer applicators to just want to reach a certain goal and keep their clients happy. This gives you an opportunity to meet your aesthetic goals without that front loading of nitrogen before the blackout period. And not only does it have such a slow release of nutrients over time, it helps make the fertilizer that you've applied more effective. And to go back to the comment David made earlier about pre-construction, how important it is to amend soil before landscapes are added. The amount of fertilizer and water required to establish those landscapes, it's hard to measure it. When you have enthusiastic companies out there trying to please their client, whether it be a builder or a developer or a homeowner, typically they're going to go above and beyond to meet their goals. Building it right from the start makes a massive difference in the amount of inputs that you have. And it's almost like a snowball effect. So if you have a lawn that does not absorb water very well because the soil conditions are terrible, you tend to over apply water. Not only are you wasting water, typically you can cause some disease problems by overwatering. And then you have to apply fungicide. And if you apply fungicide, you have weak turf, and then they apply nitrogen in order to help those areas recover. So those are the very difficult inputs to measure. Soil amending helps reduce all of those across the board. So I think, getting builders and developers to understand the potential savings on the backside will make it easier for them to understand the investment on the front side. And at the end of the day, reducing the irrigation usage and the fertilizer and chemical inputs should be, front of mind for every community.
Thank you, Mark.
Go ahead. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thank you. I first apologize for calling my dogs while being not muted, taking them for a walk. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the specifics of the Newberry facility, and you also kind of dove into and started answering one of the questions I had, which was with regard to what products are you trying to take in to compost in the first place? So with regards to the size of the facility, you're looking at Newberry, potential for expansion, and then what like the mix is of products you would bring in to actually compost.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, sure. That's a
If you want, I can kind of jump in on that one if you want me to.
yeah. Go ahead.
So Newberry they're going to have a total of 200 acres. They just purchased a substantial amount more, which is surrounding the existing wastewater treatment plant in Newberry, which is just on, I guess you could say, the west side of town. They're going to have Alachua County is going to put a public works and utilities operations in there, which would be next door to us. Basically, almost a transfer station for MSW, which would be take garbage from the west side of town and it would go to Newberry. We could separate. The theory is we would separate food waste there and it would go to our compost facility. So that's something they want to put there. We're going to be on 15 to 20 acres, where we would process yard waste, food waste, biosolids, and meat. And what I mean by meat is Anna Prizia, one of the commissioners, I'm sure you guys all know, she is wanting to put a meat processing plant in Newberry, which would go on this, again, 200 acres. It would, so they're laying out the 200 acres now, but our facility would be 15 to 20 acres. There's supposed to be a ant research facility out there as well. There's going to be a cell tower. There's going to be a fire training facility. So it's going to be an assortment of facilities on 200 acres. So I think that answers your question. But again, 15, 20 acres, we're going to be recycling food waste. Yard waste is obviously the carbon bulking agent. We'll be doing biosolids, and we'll also be doing meat and any other items that can be compostable. So,
Yeah, I think the the original design there too was to kind of split that facility into it's almost basically two operations. It gives us the ability to make different products. But yeah, as Ryan said, there's other feedstocks too that we handle in different parts of the state. We do citrus pulp from Tropicana. We do, you can take waste drinks, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, that kind of deal. We do all kinds of things across the country, waste beer. So anything organic basically that we can decompose. And we do it in a manner that is basically friendly and low impact. That's the benefit of the process.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I was fascinated by the reverse physics. I was wondering if you could just briefly, I know this is not high on
I'll
the
wait.
list.
I'll wait until George is done.
Oh, I'm sorry, George. I've been trying to find the hand where I can pose a question. I haven't found it on my screen.
Sure.
But anyway,
Push
yes.
the reactions button down at the bottom, George.
okay, I was wondering about that. Sorry about that all.
Sure. Yeah, I can give you an explanation of the biology. These are enzyme producing bacteria. So they basically accelerate decomposition, particularly of the decomposed materials like lignin and cellulose, which is which makes up a majority of our yard waste in Florida. The biology is that's kind of what drives that dynamic of because the inoculant is so reactive to oxygen, and when we build a compost pile, which is an elongated windrow, a pyramid shaped kind of windrow, as you can imagine, once the materials, the feedstocks are mixed, we place the inoculant on the surface of the pile. It's applied as in spots. It's not mixed throughout the whole pile. It doesn't need to be, because it's so not aggressive is not the right word, but it's so prolific that we can place it at certain points along the windrow, and it will basically grow and multiply rapidly. There's a 20-minute reproduction time as far as recell growth. So a gram of the inoculant contains about 2.2 billion viable colonies of these bacteria. So, and they can replicate every 20 minutes. So 2 billion becomes 4, becomes 8, 16, maths goes on. So, because they're so reactive to oxygen and they're placed on the surface of the pile, that movement and heat generation moves laterally initially along the surface of the pile, close to where most of the oxygen is. So we get high heats on the extreme edge of the pile. There is an insulating capping layer, which I think I discussed earlier, which is when we finish composting and we run the product through a screen, we separate the fine component from the oversized fraction. The oversized fraction goes back into the compost process for further decomposition. So we also use that oversized fraction to create a capping layer, basically a 9 or 12-inch layer over the top of the pile to encapsulate everything, so everything's covered. Again, that's an instant biofilter. It deters vectors and flies, etc. So everything's basically entombed. So that microbial population runs along the inside of that capping layer and on the surface of the pile. So if you go outside with your temperature probe the next morning and stick it in the windrow, 4 or 5 inches in, you'll see that needle jump off the dial. And as you push the probe into the center of the pile, it's actually cold in the middle. So it's the reverse of normal composting. So
That's amazing.
And as that population builds, and if you imagine simple physics, you have a natural chimney effect in a windrow. Heat rises out the top and draws cold air in the side. So that biological activity is basically close to that surface. And as they consume the feedstocks and they move towards the center of the pile, they basically break down the putrescible wet materials, which allows air to basically follow them in. So you can enhance that natural chimney effect in the windrow, keep it aerobic, don't have to turn it. And the other benefit of not turning it is that those populations, as you saw from that one photograph, they become so prolific that you can physically see them in the pile. So so by not disturbing them and turning the pile, they don't have to kind of regrow each time you disturb it. So again, it's a very basic in its simplicity, but it's extremely effective.
So the technique evolved over time as you discovered sort of phenomena about.
Yeah, I mean, it was the fact that food waste and things like food waste and putrescible materials that could potentially have pathogens in them when they come to you, like fecals and salmonella, etc., which you'll get with putrescible waste, food waste, biosolids, that type of thing. Conventional windrow composting requires time and temperatures are met. So typically for conventional composting, you have to turn your windrow at least 5 times in a 15-day period at the beginning of the process when it's at its hottest. So if you can imagine, if you've got food waste in there that you buried in there and then you run a windrow turner over it, all that stuff comes to the surface of the pile and becomes exposed. So that's a problem. It generates soda, creates issues with vectors and birds, etc. So we're basically doing the reverse, where we're not disturbing it. Everything's encapsulated, entombed, and undisturbed. So yeah, it's a very beneficial process in that respect.
And the enzymatic discovery, what were you targeting when you discovered?
And nothing like that. I was trying to make potting soil for back in England. My family were market gardeners, and I became interested in plant propagation when I was about 12. So I had a little greenhouse in my parents' backyard, and I used to grow plants from cuttings that my father had a job where he traveled around and he would sell these plants out the back of his van. And that was, as aside from doing his proper job. So that was mine and his way of, of earning some money. And in 1990, the UK government decided to ban the extraction of peat moss from lowland peat bogs in the UK, and every horticultural growing media was peat-based in the UK. So it was a massive problem at the time. It was big news. The royal family got involved. Prince Charles was all over it. So it was a massive thing. It was quite a novelty that I was kind of involved in that stuff, and I was so young. Ended up on radio, television, like looking like what's going on. So it was. So yeah, I was trying to make potting soils to replace peat, which was very difficult. And to create a low nutrient, low salt bulk material like peat from organic materials is extremely difficult. So I was working with paper pulps and sawdust and bark and all these other wood products. And but they're so high in carbon that when you add fertilizer to a potting soil, they'll consume it because that carbon wants to break down. So it'll take all that nitrogen away from the plant. So I played around. I made hundreds and hundreds of different mixtures of soils, growing medias, etc. And this particular one that I was really proud of, that looked like peat and smelt like peat, unfortunately got super hot and decomposed itself in 72 hours. So I was at that point back to the drawing board. Well, that's no good. But then a couple of months later, I was trying to compost paper pulp from recycled paper pulp from a de-inking plant. They had about 600 tons a day of reject paper fiber. Again, high carbon, couldn't get it to break down. So I just thought to myself one day, well, the stuff that broke down really quick, I can remember what that was. So I made some, and I, just made a little pile on my bench and in the shed, and I was looking at it and poking it. I'm thinking, man, this stuff's getting hot. I had a couple of truckloads of paper pulp outside in the yard, and I just went out there, dug a hole in the pile, and buried this stuff in there. Walked outside the next day, and the steam rising out the pile, and that hence the inoculant was born. So it was just a crazy discovery, really.
Very cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. Go ahead, George.
I was curious as to what the phosphorus content of the fresh delivered command is, and what is the rate that is being recommended for use in the urban environment. I guess I guess the two scenarios that you mentioned, one was the pre-construction soil amendment, and then also the top dressing.
Yeah, the pre-construction soil amendment, we've been trying to increase the soil organic matter content to about 3 to 4%. So it generally takes about 3 or 4 cubic yards of compost per 1,000 square feet. Again, the studies that are in the process of being written up did involve lysimeters. They did involve measuring surface water runoff as well from these lots. Top dressing is a different because you have existing turf and you can't bury it, so otherwise it won't grow. So top dressing is a much more gradual introduction. So it's about a half a cubic yard of command per 1,000 square feet, particularly on something like zoysia grass or Bermuda or anything like that. So so again, I mean, the level of phosphorus in the product again depends on the feedstocks, but typically, if you get a well-balanced compost, you're about dry weight percentage, about 1.5% phosphorus as P2O5. So it's not an astronomical amount. Only based on studies again that were done with column pour-throughs, which was amending soil, sandy soil with command, and then pouring water, deionized water at that through those columns, showed about 30%, I believe, no, 25% of the P2O5 was actually available in the first season, and only 10% of the nitrogen is actually plant available in year 1, based on the extrapolation of those pour-through tests. So in working with FDACs on that, on the agricultural side, there's a program now where the growers have to basically record every pound of nutrients that they put out on their groves or agricultural lands. So we have a rate that was approved by FDACs based on that study that says that we have to account for 10% of the nitrogen and 25% of the phosphorus in year 1. So
What does a cubic yard weigh?
About 1,000 pounds, a bit less, about 950. So there's just over 2 cubic yards per ton.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
I have a question actually. You talked about like the composition of compost. The way that your method works, do you still have to maintain that 3-to-1 ratio? And if so, how do you control that?
Typically, we like to. There are situations where we can go substantially higher on the carbon-based side, just because of the nature of the inoculant and its ability to, typically if you're just composting yard waste, that's a 6-9 month process using conventional methodology. If you want to make something, substantially high quality or mature, whereas we can do that in about 30 days. Using the inoculant. So we are able to decompose a typical CN ratio that you want to achieve at the start of a compost operation is 30-to-1, 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, but we can push that higher to about 40, 50 or 60-to-1 and still get good results based on the use of this inoculant and its ability to break down lignin and cellulose. The opposite way, we never go there. There are a lot of operations that have excesses of putrescible material and they don't have enough carbon, and that's when you have issues with odors and problems and leachate and all that kind of deal. Because so we never do that, but we know better. But so yeah, it is some fluctuation there. So we go from typically anywhere from 30 to 60-to-1 at the beginning down to the command when it's finished has a CN ratio of below 15. in some cases, it can be as low as 10 or 11 to 1, which does actually match soil humus. And the benefit there is that we create a product that has no nitrogen drawdown. So, or you can, if you want to, you can make a product with a higher carbon based and amend the soil that has excess nutrients or leaching problems. You can put high carbon materials into a soil and make it utilize nitrogen if you want it to. And I think that's something that we are seeing. You know, that the soil amending is a fascinating aspect, and working with these builders and developers to try and, you know, force their hand to start implementing these type of practices. But also, as you all know, that we have urban development on the coast that was built without any barrier between surface water runoff that goes straight into coastal areas off of parking lots and pavements and sidewalks and storm drains. And so I see now that these communities are doing just what I just mentioned, that they're doing engineered wetlands. So they're having pre-treatment. I'm actually going to a facility in the morning in Vero, which is a water treatment system that treats, I think it's lake water, basically, that they're farming it to create algae, which is a form of nutrient removal before they discharge the water to the Indian River Lagoon. So I'm going there to look at the algae to see if it's suitable for as a compost feedstock, because that ultimately would be a really cool. You know, we have lakes and rivers with excess nutrients. If we can grow algae, then remove that algae and then compost it, turn it into something that doesn't create problems, then again, another nice simple closed loop system where we can turn nutrients into beneficial products.
Yeah, right on.
Mm-hmm.
And the facility that you're setting up in Newberry, you mentioned that it would take like food waste from basically the municipal solid waste and separate it out and use that. Are there any plans or potential plans in the future to do like a household like bin with compost or anything like that, like a
I think that's
roadside pickup?
Yeah, in other parts of the country where I operate, and particularly over in the West, I'm in California. I mean, that's commonplace that people have a brown bin that they put all their food scraps and yard waste into. It's like a wheel cart. Obviously, the potential there is contamination. We also have experience with food waste. They call it SSO, I think it is. In Europe, they call it SSO, which is basically everybody has a little pail on their kitchen countertop, and they put their kitchen scraps in a biodegradable or compostable bag, and they put it in this pail, and it goes out in the brown bin. So we also have equipment that can basically debag that. And then there's a machine called a Tiger, which is a food waste depackaging machine, where you can take you can take canned food, aluminum cans, plastic bottles, all that kind of deal, and you can put it through that machine to basically depackage it. Bags of chips, you name it, they can go right through that machine. It gets a food waste stream that's about 99.8% clean. So that again is very useful for the likes of, particularly in the Orlando area where you've got the massive theme park, right? Huge amount of basis that free is extremely difficult. Also, the plastics, they're coming closer together in price, but conventional plastics and compostable plastics, there was a massive price differential a few years back, which is, it's coming closer together, so it's not such a problem anymore. But it's sometimes easier just to collect the food waste, allow for the contamination, and then run it through a machine that will remove it, which could be done at a waste transfer station, so that plastic and contamination doesn't actually end up going to the compost operation, just the clean food waste does. So I've seen that done. City of New York's doing that. They have these machines in different suburbs around the city where the food waste goes through a Tiger machine to remove trash contamination before the food waste either goes to composting or anaerobic digestion. So there are systems in play. I think the biggest roadblock I've ever seen to food waste is basically the collection and handling of it. Particularly here where we have such a high humid environment, high temperature environment in the summertime. So collection has to be a regular occurrence to provide, to prevent problems with odors and smells, and because it's hot and humid, stuff progresses so quickly. We did have a program running for a while with Publix, and they were actually putting food waste into roll carts and then putting them in their cold storage until they were collected, which allowed us to do a 2 or 3 day a week collection. So yeah, so it can be done. It's just, but again, we bring that experience from operations in other parts of the country. One of my colleagues that I used to work with, who was kind of a years back, he's now he's head of organics for Republic, and I know people that work at all these big companies that we work with hand in hand, and so we know what's going on across the country and beyond. As I say, we've got operations in Australia and Europe, so we do have access to these technologies, and usually have a solution that. And again, I like simple stuff, so low tech, simple stuff. It works every time. So, yep.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, David.
Is there another speaker?
There's no other speaker tonight. David Moritz is gonna talk to us for about 10 minutes, but that's it.
Yeah, Bruce hasn't had a chance to ask a question yet, so let him go first.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Yes. Are you going to be able to collect from other parts of Alachua County other than Newberry, say Gainesville, food waste from restaurants and places?
Yes, I think that's definitely the plan. We want to, we want the facility to be large enough and viable enough where we're, because a lot of the equipment that we utilize, the Tiger depackaging machine, etc., they do have a substantial price tag. So yeah, economics do come into play. So, but there are enough generators, and there is enough locally to. So yeah, we'll service the whole of Alachua County.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, my question had to do with, forgive me if you already answered this when you were answering George Hoskins' question, but mine is related to the fact that our law for the application of fertilizer, and it's starting to get into other counties as well, as I understand it, restricts the use of any phosphorus, in any additive you're putting into the ground. I'm not sure I got the exact amount, and how much, and whether it violates that process, whether, is that something that can be modified, when you're,
yeah, I mean,
together?
exactly. Yeah, most of these other ordinances or restrictions in other parts of the state, there's been research done on compost for 30, 40 years now. So, and in the drier states in the West, like California and Colorado, I mean, compost use is commonplace for new construction and soil amending, and at high rates. So the studies have been done on numerous occasions. We are a little unique here because and that's something we're looking at. Can you modify that soil with organics and something else to help that organic matter stick around longer, which would be a clay content or something? But so yeah, but we again, as I say, I mean, I keep referring to these studies and tests that are going on, but there are models now where we're starting to do a kind of our own testing with water extractable phosphorus to look at leachability. I did a study in Colorado recently with a product there, which was made under license by a company called A1 Organics, and they did testing up in the Northeast. Company called AgriSource that specializes in water extractable phosphorus testing, and they were able to determine that there was only 0.0 something 03% of the phosphorus actually available or plant available at any point in time, which wouldn't be create leaching potential, etc. So, but again, yes, I think it again that kind of goes back to that FDAX discussion that when they understood that we were putting large amounts of compost out in citrus groves, etc., they were like, well, you have to account for that nitrogen and phosphorus, but then we have to kind of work with them to say, well, we can't, because we're not, yes, we're putting out 40 pounds of nitrogen per acre, but only 4 pounds of that's actually plant available in the first year. So so we can't account for the other 36 pounds at that point in time. So and so so it's understanding that dynamic and release of nutrients. And also, does that material do to the receiving soil? Does it make nutrients in that receiving soil more plant available? Because it can, but again, that's kind of more of a natural process where it's an assimilation between the biology and the plant. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Can we help to eliminate? We've got certain developers now, or actually on top of the world, we're able to reduce their nitrogen fertilizer inputs substantially because they use command on every new home now. But I still don't think they've dialed it back to the degree that they could, because I don't think they're allowing for these other factors. So and I think as we learn more, we'll understand that we'll be able to dial back synthetic inputs even further. But yes, I think these ordinances can definitely be modified as we learn more. Because having a ban on phosphorus, compost is always going to have phosphorus in it, regardless of the feedstocks it came from. So to say that you can't put any phosphate out, even if it's not going to create a problem, I think is an issue that we may run into in certain circumstances. But again, easily adjusted, easily considered. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the commission's modifying it, but I would like to see a copy of the research, so that would probably be very helpful to us. So we could pass the information along from that.
One comment relative to the phosphorus, David, is just in this area, especially where we're over limestone, it's very rapidly bound up, actually. And so phosphorus really isn't an issue in North Florida. Right. I think a lot of those phosphorus restrictions are completely because of South Florida and the substantial problems they have.
Right, and there are some places down there where that's the law they're passing. I was reading the law that was being done for Orlando, and that's what was in it. It said no phosphorus. So,
and a lot of that's because there's not a need. That being said, like incidental phosphorus in compost, is definitely not. It's definitely not.
Yeah, so it sounds like we need to work on legal language to get into these ordinances, to modify them to to allow it without just blanket approval of composting in general, because that might just give people a means to slip in all sorts of things which they don't belong in there. So
okay. The other issue with the phosphorus is the runoff. And if you're top dressing in urban environments, then you are going to be subject to runoff of the material. So yeah, the phosphorus is the one that's curious to me with the product. I'm just wondering if there's can they aerate after they apply, after they top dress to?
Yeah, we typically aerate. We typically aerate before we top dress.
Yeah. Either before or after, yes, to try to get it to some of it to at least stay in the soil. Yeah,
sure.
It's the phosphorus side of the equation that just causes questions, at least in my mind. So, particularly at the rates that are going on underneath the citrus trees, and like you said, you can't get you're going to have phosphorus. So that seems to be a big issue with EPAC, and probably something worth investing in the research side of things.
Certainly.
The cool thing about it is, in the research that Evan Bean did, and we're putting out 80 tons per acre, and we're seeing if any no phosphorus leaching, and in a citrus grove we're putting out 4 tons per acre. So it's And if we can cut out granular fertilizer, which is obviously leaching through sandy soils, I mean, I think that's a win-win.
Yeah. Well, any phosphorus containing material that we put on most of our soils, except for the uncoated sands, is going to build up in the soils. And, you know, if you think 50 years, 100 years, 500 years down the road, it's at least an issue to keep in mind. I don't know what the answer is to the phosphorus. I mean, you know, you got what you guys are working with, you've got biosolids, you've got manures, you've got all of these phosphorus sources. The nitrogen is seems to me to be more manageable, but the phosphorus just builds up. And I admit, it's a conundrum to me to figure out how to get phosphorus out of the soil.
Yeah, and that could be, as I say, we're very interested in looking at the biological aspects of that. I refer to the research that was done in Australia over the recent years, and that was that basically they narrowed it down to actinomycetes in the soil that were actually working in the simulation with symbiotic relationship with the plant to basically mine phosphorus, I guess, from the soil. So I think, you know, those things start to function better if, again, you know, organic matter, as most people know, is key to soil health. So an overuse of fertilizer will cause rapid degradation of organic matter to the point where you don't have any. We've seen that in the sugarcane fields down south, and where 10-foot of muck soil has disappeared over 3 decades or 4 decades. So yeah, I think it you know, we're trying to restore that balance. We're trying to look at the biological relationship between the soil and the plant to see if we can actually start to utilize not just phosphorus. I mean, iron and magnesium and all these other things that can get bound up in the soil as well. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I was wondering if there were some ways, just thinking about the chemistry, in areas where the soil is already high in phosphorus, where you would likely use this product, if there aren't some pre-treatments that you can do, you know, like with iron or aluminum, to precipitate the phosphorus in the product so that the phosphorus isn't much of an issue, except long-term.
Right.
Just thinking off the top of my head, you know, maybe there's some tricks that you can play to reduce the likelihood that the phosphorus would move and stay away from uncoated sands.
George, you beat me to it on the ferric phosphate. How can you imagine a way to precipitate the phosphate using a ferric form?
You asking me?
Yeah.
No, I'm asking the visitors.
Right. Yeah.
I just throw it out there as one idea that might, you know, down the road, as you develop the technologies and look at how to tweak the product so that it can deal with that particular problem.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as we kind of look at the regional soils as well, I think we'll be able to dial in the application rates to a better degree, you know, as to what is actually required. We do a lot of soil testing. We're not across the board at 4 cubic yards per thousand when we're soil amending. The Tavistock project that we did in the Lake Nona area, it was showing about 1.5% organic matter already in the soil. So we dial those application rates back. It's just, you know, I know that the Florida soils will only hold so much organic matter because they are so sandy. So putting excess in there is just not beneficial. It's just a waste of money because it's just going to decompose really quickly. So, so again, it's just getting all that in balance. Sure.
Well, y'all are on the right track, I think.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
David, did you still have a question, or?
I'll put my hand down. Thank you. I think we all still have questions, but I'm not sure there's many answers at this point in time.
Yeah, we really all appreciate you coming out and talking to us.
No problem. We'll give us another year or two and we'll come back and
yeah, we'd love that.
Hopefully we'll have a facility in Alachua County by then. So, perfect. All right.
Sounds
Well,
great.
thank you for your time. Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so moving on, we don't have too many other items. We can, the only other things aside from David wants to have a discussion about the Santa Fe FML, but we can, and then we have just general discussion, ideas for the next workshop and so on. So why don't we go ahead and move into your discussion, David?
Okay, yeah, first thing I want to say is I asked, and this will go towards what we're going to do next month, is I asked Stacy Greco to give us an update on the MFL, Santa Fe River MFL. The Santa Fe River MFL and the Ishtatni MFL are tied together, are linked together, and what the Water Management District and FDEP want to do is they want to, I guess they already have, but it hasn't been signed off on by the legislature. They want to change the, the status of the Santa Fe River from recovery to prevention. And they're, I guess, putting the Ishtatni, I don't know if it was in recovery before, but it's in recovery as of now. So the what hasn't been done is they haven't written the plan for recovery and the plan for prevention. Now, I also asked Bob Palmer if he'd give a talk next month on the B maps and the work he's been doing with Florida Springs Council on that. They've been suing the state over the B maps, and one of them being, the one that covers the Santa Fe River. And the one thing that's clear from reading the legal document, which I did, and I've read several of them at this point in time, and these aren't short, they're like reading books, okay? And they're all written in legalese, which makes them much easier to read, of course. So not. And one of the things, but one of the things that came excruciatingly clear to me, both from the documents I read and from reading the B map that we got from the Orange Creek Basin, writing of the Orange Creek Basin B map, was that none of these B maps account for all these people that are coming into Florida and the amount of water that they're going to use. Okay, and it's a substantial amount. So, there's no way that these B maps can be accurate to any degree that's helpful if they don't account for that. But above and beyond that, they're inaccurate in the amount of nutrients they, allocate, and they're inaccurate in the number of the means they have of offsetting those nutrients. The law says that they have to account for it, and they're not. And when they go to court to solve these issues, the judges go, oh, well, the state says it can't be done this fast. Give them another 20 years, Unfortunately, I think in 20 years, if we keep going this route, we're not going to, we're not going to be in a very good shape. So we need to start solving some of these problems now. So that's one of the real important things I want to bring up. I think that we may need to at least recommend to the county that they fight the MFL plans for the Santa Fe River if it's not sufficient. So we need to know whether it's sufficient. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm certainly not capable of understanding whether it's sufficient. I can understand the statistics aspect of it, but I don't understand some of the other aspects of what they're doing. I can't understand offhand whether the plan is going to work. My understanding is, though, that a peer review group that looked at this said that they didn't think that where they're at right now, at least, they didn't feel that it was a workable process. So, we're going to need to look at what the experts say on this, and then make a recommendation on this, when the information becomes available and when before such a time as the Water Management District presents, these plans to the legislature for approval so that we can fight against them. And I just want to make everyone aware that this is coming down the road. We all need to put this in our study list of things to keep on track with. Some of the information can be gotten from the Water Management District, and some of it can be gotten from the FDEP on the what they're doing on these on the management plans. We need to, and there are two different things going on here, of course. There's the BMAP and the MFL, and the MFL has to do with just water quantity. And that's a big deal, but the BMAP also is for, water quality. We need to take a look at both those things, maybe jump on board in some way, with those before they're totally decided without any input from anybody, that has an ability to change their mind at all. And I think the county does have some, some weight to throw in the direction of making the state look a little closer to both the BMAP and the MFL. Comments, anyone that
Go
knows?
ahead, George.
Yeah, David, when you mentioned that the judges have a tendency to go, oh, well, that we'll just need to give more time. It's almost suggesting no matter how much evidence we muster, marshal, they will just keep on cutting them slack.
Of course.
And allowing them to. So what do you do? Do you make an end run around logic and go after the judges in some legal way to say, look, you're just facilitating this by sort of undermining the foundation of building rational arguments with data, driven arguments. You follow what I'm saying?
All this committee can do is make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners regarding, somehow presenting a legal challenge to the state to accepting these as they are, okay? If enough other counties do the same thing, the state will be somewhat, moved to do the right thing. I mean, to me, this is not something that we have anything to, that we can help in any way, but other than by our own vote. It's a matter that, you got to change the governor, and the legislature before you're going to get these things done seriously, because the governor is the one who appoints the leads to all these agencies.
Yeah.
And he's the one who recommends these judges or appoints these judges. So, until we get some judges in there that are more worried about, protecting citizens than they are, their political careers, we're not going to get very far. And even with the right law. I mean, one of the things that Bob Palmer has convinced me of, and not even just Bob, it's seeing how these cases have progressed over the last few years, the BMAP cases in particular, and the MFLs actually too. And they present incredibly powerful, strong, cases demonstrating not only how this is just insane to keep going the direction we're going, but how it's also illegal. Here's what you got to do in every case. And, the judges pretty much just ignore it. And well, for the BMAPs in particular, they say, they've got a kind of a stepwise plan. They're just going to adjust this over the years. We got to give them some time, to look at the problem and try and solve the problem. And so therefore, we're going to allow them to go ahead and not do what the law says regarding what they have to do during BMAPs. And we're already into the third time frame of some of these BMAPs, which are supposed to have by the second already been adjusted so that they did work, and are still getting the same treatment from from the FDEP and from the judges that that a rule on them, either administrative court judges or even the appeals judges. So because right now that's the one that the Florida Springs Council is dealing with, and I think they're going to get rejected just as strongly in every case. They are getting rejection already from them.
Even in higher courts. Is that
yeah,
what you're
and even in higher courts, I get it. Yeah. And there's, and it's just not feasible to go to the Supreme Court because look who
Right.
appointed all those guys, I mean, it's the same
Don't view it
problem.
as a waste of time.
Yeah, my solution is, Bob doesn't like, my solution is, you pass a new law which goes above the ability of the legislature to overturn it. And that's what the right to clean water is about. Right to clean water has been totally rewritten, by the way. I'll get you all a copy of it as soon as I have it. It's doing pretty much the same things, but it's doing it with a different verbal slant on it because, it's just trying to appeal to people, to do the right thing is all. And it's it sounds less like it's right to nature and more right for, for human beings, but it's really not going to allow all the insanity, that's going on under our current legal system. So hopefully, to me, it's just another tool. I'm not sure it's going to do anything because if they won't follow existing law, what makes me think they're going to follow?
David? Is Stacy able to, I guess I was thinking, do you know any contacts with this so-called peer review group that could educate us a little bit?
I believe some of that information was on the sites. I did ask Stacy to get that to me. I did tell her that I need to get back to her once more, and I knew that, you know, once you guys gave me feedback, I would be able to do that. I'll see if I can't get a copy of that directly. I'll go on and look for it myself, and if I can find it, I'll send it to everyone. And if I can't find it, I'll get Tracy or Stacy to tell me where it's at, and I'll get either get her to link it to you, or I'll send it to you. But I think that's very important to have that peer review group information, you know, what they said about it. So, you know, and
David.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Scott. I just wanted to, I did want to say that, you know, the fact that the Itchitucknee, my understanding is it's theoretically in recovery, and then the lower Santa Fe is in prevention, unless that's changed in the last couple of weeks. I mean, that's actually, I know it maybe doesn't feel like a lot, but it's kind of a big deal, because most of these systems are not being found to have issues. So hopefully that could lead to more interest and more activity for trying to do in that system down the road.
Yeah.
You know, most of these MFLs that are being done are not showing that there are any issues. So the fact that it is showing in recovery is kind of a big deal. And it's likely to spur more projects and more effort on that system than there would otherwise be.
Yeah.
Is it perfect? Obviously not. But, you know, this is somewhat of a case of, you know, we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good.
And for what it's worth, the Santa Fe River is on the border, you know, it's just over the borderline into, you know, the prevention, you know, from, you know, and not in recovery anymore. But nothing really changed. I think what changed was their way of calculating it. And I don't really have a lot of faith in that, because I talked to the people that, you know, worked on that, you know, in the North Florida, you know, planning group up there. And, you know, they didn't have much confidence in the math the state was applying. And the state was pretty much ignoring some of them, you know, who were making some, you know, very good arguments as to why, you know, the modeling tool that they were using wasn't really as good as it could be, and wouldn't really do the job appropriately. But what scares me the most is that they're making these plans, you know, for quantity of water, without even calculating in all of the water that's going to be used by the people that are coming into the state. And, you know, if we're getting, what, 1,000 people a day, or what was the number? I mean, it's a huge number.
I mean, I don't think that's completely true. Existing utility water use permits are mostly across the board based on kind of population projections. So there are very few utilities that are like bumping up against their current water use permits. My understanding is the way they model those, they're modeling for the permitted uses, not the actual use.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's perfect. And, you know, there's, I think, a host of questions associated with the groundwater modeling, mostly because it's very difficult. And so I think there is maybe a level of certainty sometimes that is not justified. But
yeah, I agree, it's not easy.
They are modeling, my understanding is they're modeling the consumptive use permits that are in place, not the actual pumping.
Yeah,
in general. So
that's part of it. And the other part of it is they're, you know how very well how groundwater is, and they're not modeling all the water that's in the ground. You know, they're in whole sections of it that are just not in there at all. So there's problems with the model. I think that, you know, they leave out, they go with the model as opposed to what's actually being pumped, as you said, and that's a problem too. But from what I understand of it, you know, they are basically, and I've listened to some of these presentations on how much they were going to, and I remember one of them went down by 50% in one place and up by 100 or 200% in another, you know, within a matter of a month or two while they were going in preliminaries. I can understand how this stuff can happen mathematically, but, you know, when it does happen, it makes you wonder about the tools they're using. If they're that far off, you know, I can accept that they need to be, you know, that they need to work them to be a little better than they are. but they get to the point where they just finally say, this is it. And that, and this is the right, absolute, right answer. And that's not, it's, when they had to get there by fudging numbers, to begin with, to fit what they had to have, meaning, available water had to, couldn't be more, there couldn't be less available water than there was water being, proposed to be used in, a number of years down the road. So there's problems with it. And I don't think the state is taking the right approach dealing with it. When it comes to the pollution, that's a different matter, but they're also not taking the right solution there. When you look at BMAPs and they don't account for removing all of the, the known pollution that's in water bodies, one, and then two, they miscalculate the amount, they're going to get out and do not go back and actually evaluate the effectiveness of various plans or, projects to clear, pollution from water. And, I've read some of those and they just, they will sometimes say, oh, this is nowhere going to not give us anywhere near this amount of result, and they'll adjust it, but the result may still be 5 or 10 times what it really is expected to give. So I take all of that with a grain of salt. My bottom line is I don't think that they're, in some cases you can see where the numbers are so far off. And I'm not going to speak too much more on this because the best thing for you to do is to actually read the legal documents. This is one where the scientists have collected the numbers, have put the numbers out there for people to read, and the attorneys have gotten that numbers, and that's the numbers they're using to make their calculations from. And the calculations they're making do not even come close to the ones that the state is making, and they're both using supposedly the same numbers.
So David, the peer review that you mentioned, are those there's a discrepancy between what they found and the state? Is that correct?
I don't know, and that's why I want to get them too. My understanding, this was from Bob, was that the peer review people that did the peer review, they weren't that confident that the states, that what the state was saying could be done with the BMAP could actually work. They weren't saying, and to me, I don't think it's absolutely not going to work. Just based upon looking through, how they were evaluating. The sources of pollution, and then how, on the other hand, they were evaluating the projects. Those two both were being done wrong. They'd lower all, the amount of source. Plus, look at if you discount 50% of, or more than 50%, I think it isn't most of the pollution in around the Santa Fe. Isn't most of that pollution known to be from agriculture, George?
I don't know the exact number. I know that people, in years past, not too far past, have always said that agriculture is the biggest contributor in the Swanee basin. But I don't know the exact. I don't know the exact numbers.
Okay, I remember looking at them, but I don't remember them either at this point in time. It's been a couple of years since, and of course things have changed since then. But this was a number that was published by the FDEP,
Well,
in
Swanee,
various parts of the state, saying here's what the major was, and here's the percentage that they estimated to be from different modes of pollution. And
I know that agriculture has a huge burden in the Swanee.
Right.
BMAP. It's something over 4 million pounds of nitrogen, right. And it's thought that there could be 3 or more times that.
Well, and the problem, of course, is that isn't even being looked at in terms of the BMAPs. The BMAPs exclude that. If you've got over 50% of the pollution coming from a means which is then excluded from the BMAP, there's absolutely no way you can create a BMAP that will work, right? Because the remaining 49%, even if it's 51-49, the remaining 49% cannot account for that 51%, taking themselves in that 51% down to a level that meets the law. And in fact, it's not 49 and 51. It's probably closer to something like 25-75 at best, maybe even less than that. But that number we'd have to look up. But bottom line is saying that's the sort of thing that's happening. And then when they actually calculate what a project does on the other end of things, project's supposed to be that which fixes and takes the pollution out. There's never enough projects to take all the pollution out, anywhere close to it. And they call the BMAP finished, even though the law says it has to account for it when the amount of pollution is being accounted for by removal and by projects. Okay, so yeah, I agree it's not perfect. And if it was my job to come up with it, I wouldn't be able to come up with the answer for it either. But bottom line is we can't continue to allow them to say, oh, we can just move this into the future, kick it down the road. Someone's got to say, look, it's not easy. So, but we still have to do something about it now. And so maybe if we put some pressure and build a fire under some people and everyone gets together around the proverbial table, maybe then we can all get together and come up with these solutions. The solutions not being found by kicking the problem down the road.
Well, in the meantime, David, we try to do the best we can with what we have, but in my cynical, humble opinion, this is all going to end up in a big court fight in some years down the road. And all of this is going to come crashing down like a house of cards. If you want to be even a little more cynical, you can take a look at least one Senate bill that is being proposed for the upcoming legislative session, Senate Bill 1000. Scott, are you familiar with that one?
I don't think so. I mean, I may know of it, but not by the number in that case.
You know what the number is, George?
Senate Bill 1000.
Okay.
It, in essence, takes the fertilizer recommendation process basically out of the hands of the university recommendations. They are no longer going to be the basic coin of the realm. And if an agriculture enterprise wants to use more fertilizer, then they can get a certified crop advisor to write them what they call a tailored fertilizer recommendation. And it can be more than the IFAS recommendation. And furthermore, as I read the bill, IFAS would have to mention in all of their fertilizer recommendation documents that they support this notion of tailoring of fertilizer recommendations.
Wow.
So
science is now deemed fake, right?
so be on the lookout. I mean, there's going to be a lot of pushback against that bill. So who knows where all these things, at this point in time, they may be dead on arrival, or they may be modified, or they may make it through, who knows. But anyway, just to throw another little.
I don't think any real solution will ever happen by court or by passing laws. It's going to come from people sitting down, looking at the science and saying, this is what's got to be done, and this is the best way to accomplish that without destroying ourselves in the process.
I'm telling you, it's going to end up in court.
Oh, I know. That's because that seems to be the only way we will do things in this world. It has to be done. We won't do it unless we do it in court, because we know we can win our way, so to speak. Many of us, many people do, especially those who have a lot of money, and they can just say, look, we get enough money out there, we can win this. We don't have to, give into it. Let them find somebody else to pay the bill.
When you mentioned the Senate bill, was it a Senate bill? What did you?
Senate Bill 1000.
Senate Bill 1000, yeah. It reminded me at our last meeting, and to kind of bring us back to suggested topics and things for next workshop, we discussed having maybe somebody from the county come in and kind of review some of the things that are upcoming to the legislature, and just kind of give us a read on all of that. So Mark, I think, recommended that we waited until February for that. So Mark, is that something that we can maybe add to our agenda for February? I don't know if we have anything else aside from potentially Bob Palmer talking.
And Stacy.
I can ask. I don't know that we have anybody on staff that's prepared to give us an update.
Okay.
Yeah, Senate Bill
Okay.
1000 pertains mostly to agriculture, but since we're talking about BMPs here with what David, the issue David was bringing up, it's still could be important to this committee.
By the way, the one thing to me is why I want personally to see an amendment passed is because the amendment grants home rule, limited home rule. It says that local governments can pass laws to protect the environment, local environment, which are not, exemptable by the state or preemptible by the state. I mean, to me, that's the best, best world. They could, and it doesn't mean that someone can lower that protection. It means only they have the ability to raise the level of protection, and it's only, towards in the case of the right to clean water, it's only for protecting water, and which will protect. And also, we're putting in line in to protect wetlands and combining that with another amendment that was out there. So. But, again, I don't think that law is a solution. Forcing people to do things where they don't actually see or realize the reason why they should be doing it that way is, it's just not going to work. You can't pass laws saying drugs are no good. Only those people who see that drugs aren't good for them will not take them. Those who live in poverty and have miserable lives will continue to take them, whether that drug is heroin or alcohol or whatever. They're going to continue to use drugs, if they're unhappy, and those drugs make their life less miserable.
Yeah.
So you have to get through. And by the way, I worked as a counselor for people for some time in drug prevention or drug treatment. So, but when people realize that they're not good for them, that's when they change. And until people realize that, what we're doing to our state is not in some cases not easy, if at all, fixable. I have serious doubts now whether our estuaries are fixable. We've done that much, hopefully we'll find out if they start putting out less, pollution from Lake O and it's, in the rivers. But I still, I have a great doubt of whether, they're fixable at this point in time, and whether the oceans are fixable. I mean, I think, it's already gone too far. I think it's
Well, the level of
over that tipping point.
ignorance, the level of ignorance that exists, and the unwillingness of a lot of people to become informed about endless varieties of things. I'm very cynical because of that.
Yeah. Well, to me, the key is right now, people, not taking the vaccine. Okay, it's their distrust of science. Okay, and I admit I've looked at problems in the last 10 years, from a mistrusting eye. But once I considered the science, I had to say, okay, this or that, whatever I was looking at, I had to change my viewpoint. People don't change their viewpoints, unless they're politicians. They're heroes in politics tell them these days. They don't pay, even if there's scientists out there saying, here's what we know. And they and if God forbid they should learn something, over the months and say something slightly different 6 months or a year after they first make a comment on a subject, because they're going to be called to be making things up instead of the knowledge progressing and therefore the science improving. But without following science, we're lost. We're screwed.
David, the one comment I would make on that is, I think it's a slightly harsh indictment. I think people kind of do the best with what they have. Most people aren't extremely science-based, and realistically, people don't have a lot of time. So I think we need to come up with better, more effective ways of educating people that, connect with them more. But I think a lot of it is apathy, and a lot of it is like semi-reasonable apathy, because most people, work really hard to scrape by a living so that they can go about, doing the things they absolutely have to.
Scott, I don't think people are evil. Okay, I think there are some people that are evil in this, sociopaths in this world, and they're unfortunately in positions of great power, in many cases. But for the most part, people aren't that knowledgeable. I agree. And most people do not have time to, to consider all this stuff. But the fact is, if there was an election held today, I think Donald Trump would get reelected. And that should tell you something about where the world's at. I'm not sure it's good or bad even. And yet I think that his ideas are just absolute anathema, and certainly when it comes to the environment, the guy hasn't got a clue. So, what's the answer? How do you educate people? That's one of the main things I think that needs to happen. We need to find ways to educate people more about what's going on in the world around them. And even when you can't just tell them, telling them is not going to work. Explaining to them isn't going to work. I've gone into explanation after explanation after explanation with people about various arguments they made about taking the vaccine and about an mRNA, what it does, and mRNAs were around long before we had the vaccines here, so they were doing other things with them. And they dissipate in the body at longest 4 or 5 weeks. People will say, "Oh no, it's going to be in there forever." And when I say no, we have evidence that they're not there, but I said that's not true. They just simply discount the fact. And I say, okay, well here's the study that shows it. And they say, I don't care. They made that up.
Last week, there was on PBS, Earth Emergency or Emergency Earth was in place of one of the typical science programs every week. It was the single most effective, most communicative, using graphics and words to explain the feedback loops and tipping points that are characteristic of the future in terms of climate change. And I was not familiar with these I was very unfamiliar. I certainly appreciated climate change, but this was an amazing,
including planetary perturbation. It's pretty complex. I agree.
It was a stunning production, and
I didn't see that, but I know what they had to have dealt with. So
it should be used in schools. It should be used as some form of find a venue for public service announcements. This one president, I don't know how many of you saw it, but it was the single finest. If I added up all the different shows and listened to all the different talks I've heard, none of them conveyed how critical quick movement is going to be because of these.
But George, you were ready to it. You were open to it. You were open to a scientific argument. Okay. People these days throw away if it's not something that's completely in alignment with what they're thinking and with what people in their political community have told them, they ignore it.
I think even before this what you're talking about occurred in terms of the split between the believers and non-believers of science, I think the apathy that Scott talks about was a large part of it prior to this schism between the left and the right.
And by the way, why I'm not saying of specific political parties, because I see it in both sides. I see it in both. I see as many on one as the other who simply say it's not true, this isn't the way it works, or pay no attention to it. They make their arguments based upon emotional, arguments. It's not based upon, anything that can be proven, demonstrated, and that's just, it's useless.
Sort of following along on this, just one more point, Nisha, before we go.
Sure.
There's a pretty sobering article in The Guardian this morning. The title of it is "The Next U.S. Civil War is Already Here. We Just Refuse to See It."
Yeah,
So
I believe it.
If anybody's interested in a sobering article, there you have it.
The scary bit is so many people believe on both sides again that violence is the only way to deal with this. Okay, and I'm not talking about just the extreme right. I see people on the left who are telling us that too. When we were doing the Safe War campaign, we had people on there, females who I thought were very, very intelligent, degreed people, and they were saying that they thought violence was the only thing that would solve this.
Yeah. Kath, go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I think the information environment we live in is kind of the biggest problem. I mean, it is exceptionally difficult and time consuming to be well informed on absolutely anything.
True. That's true.
It takes a huge amount of time. It takes a huge amount of effort. I mean, it's part of what I do for my job, you know, is going and learning about various issues and then trying to come up with solutions. And it takes a substantial amount of time. And so even calling it apathy isn't fair, because people are working to meet basic needs. And when people are working to meet basic needs, most people do not have this abundance of excess time. And I mean, part of it is that there is a massive amount of bad information out there. And most of that bad information is beautiful and easy to look at and very engaging, where when you go find the legalese report on an MFL or BMAP, it's extremely complex and difficult to understand. So it's, you know, I mean, I think George is on the right track in terms of, like, you know, we need better, more informative ways to show people these things. And I do think that's a huge part of the issue here. We also, you know, to the extent we can, need to separate these things from politics. At the end of the day, farmers care about a healthy, beautiful environment. People that live in cities care about a healthy, beautiful environment. Like, I don't understand, you know, we need to stop presenting these as a thing that you're either for or against. Everyone is for a clean, healthy environment. So you know, it's that's it. That has pretty much universal acceptance. So we need to, like, actually, and I mean, we're, you know, people are guilty both on the left and the right for being unwilling to compromise, you know, and my solution is the only solution. If I don't get 100% of what I'm asking for, it's not good enough. And we're all responsible for that too. So
absolutely.
You know, don't be the first to throw a stone, I guess, is the one thing I would say. It's tough. It's daunting. So
let me say one thing, since I didn't get a chance to say it. That is this: is that I absolutely, definitely do not believe that that violence has any part in any of this. Only non-violent solutions will make any kind of headway. And I agree with what you said about George's comments there. That, you know, we have to come up with a better way, you know, of communicating and of educating others. And that's something, you know, that I hope that this committee can do. That's one of the reasons why I just refuse to let these, you know, this idea of community conversations go. You know, I'd like to find, more than anything, a way to expand this, to get people from, you know, the right, people from the far left, people that don't always come to these. I'd like to see them come. And, you know, if we can start coming up with some ideas to reach the people that we aren't reaching right now, that would be, you know, to me, that would be, we could do more to help, not just, you know, Alachua County. We do more to help this entire planet by doing that than anything else.
Sure. I want to, because we're running into time here, Kathleen had a good suggestion in the chat, the PBS program, Earth Emergency, that you mentioned, George. She says maybe we can ask local WFT for a replay of it. I know that I would certainly like to see it. And, you know, I know that, like, there was a couple years ago, I think, with First Magnitude and Life on Plastic and a few other places, they kind of came together and did a screening of a movie about plastic pollution in the oceans. And that was like a pretty big, well-attended event. It was, so, you know, there's even maybe a possibility of, you know, promoting it to the extent that we can get other members of the community to watch it or something. But yeah.
I think it's on it might be on Passport. If you support PBS for like $62 a year or something,
Okay.
you have access to not just Masterpiece Theater, but Nova and all kinds of stuff, and it might be there.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a good idea, what that Kathleen said.
Yeah, I don't know how we would go about that. Maybe to ask for our group specifically to have a watch of it, or just for them to replay it to the general public? I don't know what they would be receptive to.
Try
Any
both.
thoughts?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's value in getting the whole public to see it again, because I didn't see it first time around. It'd be
Yeah, for
nice if
sure.
They would put it on at a really good
Just
time. and-
amazing, just amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, George, for that. That'd be good.
Okay, so I don't know, I guess as chair, should I reach out to them and see if that's something that's possible, or is that something that maybe
Sure.
Mark is more, they'd be more receptive to Mark since he has the Alachua County email address?
Nisha, what about the climate change, the climate group, the advisory committee? I
Mm,
mean, if both committees, double on this, it might have a little,
They meet in
Wow.
2 weeks. We can ask them.
yeah. Does,
But meanwhile, we should,
I can-
meanwhile, if we should ask the station if they would re-show it, Because
Yeah.
then, they say, well, we don't know, but then, we get the, Climate Action Committee to ask as well. Then they might say, oh, well, we're getting another committee asking us, so
sure.
2 weeks later, that might be kind of.
So yeah, I can definitely reach out to them and see
Cool.
if they're receptive to the idea.
Great.
Thank you for the suggestion, Kathleen. Okay, so we're just after 8 o'clock. So next workshop, we have potentially Bob Palmer, or is he pretty much definitely gonna come? Are you still talking to him?
Bob will come. Bob will deal with the B maps, and Stacy Greco will deal with the MFLs.
Okay, great. And then, yeah, I guess that'll make for a pretty good agenda. I don't know if there's anything else that you have planned, Mark, for us next month. Okay.
Was good. I'm glad they
Okay,
didn't
sounds
mention-
good.
And then we should have a discussion on where we're going to go with our next climate change, CC.
Sure. Okay,
Thank you,
sounds good.
everyone. Great meeting.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
thank you.